Hello and welcome back to Vote for the Music, the Eurovision podcast. I'm Benjamin Windibank, and today we're going to present to you something very special and new to this podcast. We're going to take a look at just how the Eurovision Song Contest was created in this long form, almost documentary of a podcast. We'll go into the deep depths of just how and why the contest was created and exactly who can be credited with the genesis of many of its core ideas.
This is to music first, always.
We are unstoppable.
I hope this contest can live up to its promise and continue to stand for peace and dignity for every person in this world. Thank you, Vote for the Music!
This is Vote for the Music, the Eurovision podcast.
The Eurovision Song Contest holds a distinctive place in the landscape of event television, primarily because it was conceived not to entertain but to advance the very technology of television. As Mons Zelmerlöw remarked to 204 million viewers in 2016, the contest is viewed to have been created in order to unify a continent torn apart by war. While there is, of course, some truth in that statement, it is a slight, oversimplified and romanticised version of its origins. In the aftermath of the Second World War, there was an immense desire from the international community for Europe to come together and unite in some shape or form to prevent the events of the previous decade from ever happening again. One of the most notable examples of this was when the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, spoke in 1949 calling for the creation of a United States of Europe to prevent future conflicts and rebuild the war-torn continent. He emphasised that a united Europe would be able to resist totalitarianism and promote democracy and freedom. Churchill's speech was instrumental in galvanising support for European integration, particularly in Western Europe, although his vision never included the United Kingdom, as he felt his own country would be far too occupied with its own empire to possibly lose its sovereignty and join a united Europe. However, the idea goes far further back than 1949, with one of the earliest expressions of support for the idea coming from French novelist Victor Hugo 100 years earlier in 1849. At the Paris Peace Conference that year, Hugo delivered a stirring speech also envisioning a United States of Europe. Hugo's proposal came in the aftermath of the 1848 revolutions that swept across Europe, a period marked by nationalistic uprisings and calls for democratic reforms. He advocated for a Europe where nations would transcend their differences and work together to prevent wars, ensure peace, and promote collective progress. Hugo's vision was rooted in the ideals of brotherhood, human rights, and democratic governance. While his ideas were largely idealistic and did not gain immediate traction, they planted the seeds for the concept of European unity and underscored the potential benefits of cooperation over conflict. In the 1920s, Count Richard Nikolaus von Coudenhove-Kalergi, an Austrian-Japanese politician and philosopher, took a significant step towards realising the idea of a united Europe. In 1923, he founded the Pan-European Union, the first organisation dedicated to promoting European integration. Coudenhove-Kalergi's vision was influenced by the devastation of World War I and the desire to prevent future conflicts. He envisioned a federated Europe that could stand as a third power bloc between the United States and the Soviet Union. His ideas emphasized the importance of economic and political collaboration to secure peace and prosperity. The Pan-European Union garnered support from influential figures including Albert Einstein and Thomas Mann and laid the groundwork for future efforts towards European unity. However, the earliest practical step towards unity was the establishment of the Council of Europe in 1949. The Council was founded by 10 countries: Belgium, Denmark, France, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. Its creation marked a significant milestone in post-war European cooperation. The Council of Europe aimed to promote democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, serving as a forum for dialogue and collaboration among European nations. It established the European Convention on Human Rights, which created a legal framework for protecting individual rights and freedoms across member states. The Council of Europe represented a tangible commitment to the principles of unity and cooperation and laid the institutional foundations for further European integration. However, the next significant step is the one that holds the most relevance out of them all to us, and that was the idea of forming a version of the Council of Europe which for television and radio broadcasters from across different European countries to work together for the advancement of technology. It was an idea that was as much about science as politics, despite being formed upon the back of a deeply political idea. If we look again at Zelmerlow's statement, then the unified continent torn apart by war claim really is one about those early ideas of European unity and most specifically about the Council of Europe than the Eurovision Song Contest itself. It is true that it was one of the factors that led to the creation of the contest, but it was also by far not the only one, or indeed anywhere near the most significant. To further explore that story, we must take a look at the organisation that was formed in response to this aim, and that was the European Broadcasting Union, which was created as a consortium of public service broadcasters. Founded at a meeting in Torquay, United Kingdom, representatives from 23 European countries convened to discuss the formation of a cooperative organisation that would facilitate the sharing of television and radio content across borders. The objective was to leverage the burgeoning technology of television to bring nations closer together, promoting cultural exchange and mutual understanding. It was driven by a vision of transnational cooperation aiming to transcend the fragmented media landscapes of individual countries, and perhaps out of embarrassment in the current climate, the aspect of this that is often not mentioned is that it was very certainly a fact that the EBU's creation was a response to slow but obvious beginnings of the Cold War, which was dividing Europe into Eastern and Western blocs, and there was a strong desire among Western European nations to strengthen their cultural ties and present a united front. The EBU provided a platform for these nations to collaborate and share their cultural heritage, transcending political boundaries and fostering a sense of Western European identity. However, considering the primary purpose was technology, including Eastern Bloc nations in the organisation would always have been a risky move, and the chances of its survival would have been slim. Working together between East and West likely would have halted sooner or later, as political tensions became worse. However, by showcasing Western Europe's broadcast prowess, the EBU initiated a competitive arms race in broadcast technology. This significantly contributed to the progress of Eastern Europe's broadcast capabilities, culminating notably in the formation of the Intervision network in 1960, a decade later. But before Intervision came Eurovision, and no, that wasn't the song contest. Although reminded of the fact in the opening 20 seconds of every single edition of the Eurovision Song Contest, many fail to realise that Eurovision means a whole lot more than the song contest it transmits annually. In fact, the Eurovision in the Eurovision Song Contest comes from the Eurovision network, the physical infrastructure that made pan-European broadcasting possible. Therefore, the name Eurovision Song Contest means and has always meant the song contest transmitted via Eurovision. The Eurovision network, created by the EBU, had the primary objective to promote cultural exchange and mutual understanding among the membership of the European Broadcasting Union. It aimed to achieve this by sharing live broadcasts of events such as sports competitions, cultural festivals, and significant national celebrations. The network quickly became synonymous with high-quality international television programming, bringing European audiences together and fostering a sense of shared experience. Several key technical challenges had to be overcome to make this network a reality. The core of the Eurovision network's infrastructure was a series of microwave relay stations strategically positioned across Europe. These stations used microwave radio waves to transmit television signals from one location to another, forming a chain that spanned the continent. This method allowed for the real-time relay of broadcasts over long distances without significant loss of signal quality. In addition to microwave links, coaxial cables were used for transmitting television signals, particularly in areas where microwave relay was impractical. Coaxial cables offered high bandwidth and relatively low signal attenuation, making them suitable for carrying high-frequency television signals over long distances. A critical aspect of the Eurovision network's success was the standardization of television signals. European countries had different broadcasting standards, such as the 405 line system used in the UK and the 625 line system used in much of continental Europe. The EBU played a crucial role in harmonizing these standards to ensure compatibility and seamless transmission of broadcasts across borders. To manage the complex task of routing television signals between different countries, the Eurovision network established several switching centres. These centres acted as hubs, receiving signals from various sources, converting them if necessary, and redistributing them to their intended destinations. The most notable of these was the Eurovision Control Centre in Brussels, which coordinated the network's operations and ensured smooth signal flow. While satellite technology was still in its infancy in the early 1950s, it quickly became an essential component of the Eurovision network. The launch of early communication satellites in the late 1950s and early 1960s allowed for even greater reach and reliability of television broadcasts. By the mid-1960s, satellites like Telstar and Early Bird enabled transatlantic broadcasts, further enhancing the network's capabilities. However, the name Eurovision was not in fact coined by the EBU. Originally, the name they had settled on was the Continental Television Exchange. However, writing about the exchange for the British newspaper The Evening Standard in 1951, journalist George Campy coined the term Eurovision, an amalgamation of European and television. It was merely a colloquial nickname offhandedly used in a seemingly irrelevant article for a British newspaper, yet it was the response from the BBC's George Barnes to the article that would prove so immensely significant. The BBC liked to keep a tight lid on standards, especially when it came to language, and upon one BBC executive reading Campay's article, he complained to the Evening Standard about it and insisted they issue a correction and refer to it only as the Continental Television Exchange. Spurred on by the publicity, Eurovision fell into common use as the primary term to refer to the network, not just internally by the BBC, but by the press as a whole in the United Kingdom, and within the year, the EBU voted to adopt the term as the official name for what was once the Continental Television Exchange. Recounting the events in his later life, Campay commented that,
"Apart from having invented the word, I also saved the world from having to watch the Continental Television Exchange Song Contest."
One of the technical logistics of the Eurovision included the transition in and out of the network by each member broadcaster, moving from national broadcasting at home to switching the transmission feeds to Eurovision on time and on cue was a difficult challenge. Therefore, an ident was created to signal the beginning of a transmission on the network. The ident would play in full, showing the logo of the member broadcaster that was originating the broadcast in the centre, while the sound of Marc-Antoine Charpentier's 17th century composition Te Deum played out. Te Deum had recently become popularised after being rediscovered by the music community in the early 1950s, having largely been forgotten to time for centuries. The structure of the composition made it ideal for the EBU's usage as it contained two phrases that both started out identically. This allowed for an auditory cue for at what moment member broadcasters should switch over to the transmission from the Eurovision network. The EBU's idea was that each member organisation would begin playing the ident with their own logo in the centre locally. Then at the point in Te Deum where the first phrase ended and the second phrase began, broadcasters would switch from their local transmission to the Eurovision network, which would show the host broadcaster's transmission of the ident with their logo in the centre, playing the second phrase of Te Deum and afterwards the rest of the broadcast. Then at the very end, the entire process would repeat in reverse. This method of transitioning into the network would remain in use until 1995, when it was replaced by a more accurate method using digital radio timing that would ensure each broadcaster switched over at exactly the same time. However, despite this, the EBU retained the Eurovision network's now iconic theme, and Te Deum is still used to this day to signal the beginning of a Eurovision broadcast. If you pay close attention to the ident next time you watch a Eurovision Song Contest, you may notice that the Eurovision logo that appears there is not the familiar logo of the Eurovision Song Contest, with the now iconic heart shape, but instead a colder, capitalised and sleeker logo which belongs to the Eurovision network. It's remarkable just how difficult it can be to describe the Eurovision Song Contest to someone who has never heard of it. Often phrases such as the Olympics of Music or The Voice meets the Super Bowl get trotted out, but neither are particularly accurate. Often there's an assumption by newcomers that the contest is something along the lines of a singing competition, but that's not quite true. Obviously, the performer's skill and technique when it comes to singing are important in helping them climb that all-important scoreboard, but ultimately the Eurovision Song Contest is, well, just that, a song contest. The idea of a song contest seems alien in the 21st century outside of the context of the Eurovision Song Contest. In a world saturated with talent shows and singing competitions, it's hard for many to imagine a competition where someone just performs one single original song. It's even more difficult, even for plenty of those who are familiar with the contest, to understand the appeal of that same song being performed time and time again through the many stages of the competition. From national selections to the semi-finals to the all-important grand final, it is the same 3-minute song. It's unique in the landscape of television because it's a competition that's fundamentally about the song. Despite the evolution and changes of the contest over the many decades, I believe that's something that has always managed to remain true. However, it was not the Eurovision Song Contest that invented this concept. In 1956, the Song Contest wasn't just magically created out of nowhere, just as Italian spokesperson Mario Acampa told us during the grand final of the Eurovision Song Contest 2024. A long time ago, in 1951, we started from Sanremo. with the dream of a song contest where people from all over the world could express themselves united by music. Although a slightly recontextualized telling of the story, Acampa was fundamentally correct. It all started in the resort town of San Remo on the Italian Riviera in 1951. In the years following World War II, Italy was a nation in desperate need of revitalization culturally, economically, and spiritually. The war had left much of the country in ruins, and the preceding fascist regime had stifled artistic expression for decades. As Italians looked to rebuild, the desire for a unifying cultural event celebrating the nation's musical identity began taking shape. This impulse was built upon efforts in the late 1930s and early 1940s to establish a Festival della Canzone Italiana, or Italian Song Festival. These early attempts, organised by Venice's Biennale Authority with support from Italian radio, sought to spotlight the popular music being produced by the country's singers and songwriters. However, the endeavours were short-lived, falling victim to the chaos and censorship of the Second World War. By the time of its aftermath, the idea to create a prominent national song festival was revived in full force. The emerging medium of radio, which had been tightly controlled under Mussolini's regime, became a major driving force. The state broadcaster Radio Audizioni Italiane realised the powerful potential of a nationally televised musical competition. At the time, Rise Holdings was overseen by director Niccolo Carosio, who came into the position with a vision of revolutionising Italian broadcasting and culture. A former partisan during the war, Carosio hoped to steer Rai away from its past as a propaganda machine toward being a modern entertainment service uplifting the Italian people. It was Rai's Ferdinando Pica, an executive and producer, who first proposed the specific idea of a song festival that could become an annual tradition showcasing the nation's musical talents. The objective was not just to revive Italy's popular music scene, but to redefine it after years of oppressive fascist control. By inviting open submissions of new, original songs, the festival could serve as a creative renaissance celebrating free expression and Italian artistry. Plans began coming together in 1950, with Rai securing key partnerships with the Publicity Corporation of Performing Arts, CPRI, and the Gabriele D'Annunzio Theatre in Turin. However, eventually the picturesque seaside town of San Remo on the Ligurian Riviera was selected to host the event, offering an appealing destination for Italy's cultural elite. Despite initial skepticism from some who viewed the proposal as a frivolous idea, preparations pushed forward under Pica's leadership. A prestigious organising team was assembled, guidelines were set for song submissions, and a rigid voting system incorporating public audiences and professional juries was designed. As January 1951 approached, there was a sense of anticipation across Italy. Would this festival help reignite the country's cultural passion? Could it foster a sense of national pride and identity? The stage was set for that first edition in the San Remo Casino, an event that would ultimately reshape the musical landscape of Italy. Taking place from Monday the 29th of January to Wednesday the 31st of January 1951, the event was hosted by Nunzio Filogamo, whose energy and enthusiasm immediately set the tone for editions to come. As the curtains rose on that inaugural evening, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. The carefully curated lineup featured 3 contestants, Nilla Pizzi, Achille Togliani and Duo Fasano. These artists were tasked with interpreting the 20 songs that had been selected from a pool of 240 entries, showcasing the depth of Italy's musical talent. The festival's format was designed to heighten the suspense and drama. During the first 2 evenings, 10 songs were performed each night, with only 5 from each night advancing to the grand final. This approach allowed the audience to savour the melodies and lyrics, while the composers hoped their compositions would make it through to the final. By the third and final night, Italy was well and truly hooked. As the final moments arrived, a historic decision that would echo through the ages as Grazie dei Fiori, performed by the Nilla Pizzi, was crowned the inaugural winner of Festival di San Remo. Pizzi's win was a symbolic victory for Italy's musical renaissance, her voice serving as a beacon of hope and artistic expression for a nation emerging from the shadows of war. In second place, La Luna si veste d'argento, interpreted by Nilla Pizzi and Achille Togliani, while the bronze medal went to Serenada a Nessuno, performed by Achille Togliani. And despite the Eurovision Song Contest's emphasis on television broadcasting, even down to the vision in its name, the first 3 editions of Festival di San Remo were only broadcast on the radio, as Rai had yet to launch its television service. Broadcast on Rai's Rete Rossa, the airwaves crackled with the sounds of Italy's cultural rebirth. From living rooms to cafes, Italy seemed to embrace the festival with open arms, leveraging the opportunity to celebrate their artistic heritage and look towards a brighter future. Naturally, Rai were eager to continue the festival the following year, with a return to the Sanremo Casino taking place between Monday the 28th of January and Wednesday the 30th of January 1952, once again hosted by Nunzio Filogamo. This edition introduced a new format where each song was performed by a duo or group, with the 5 selected artists interpreting multiple pieces. It was Nilla Pizzi, the triumphant winner from 1951, who dominated the competition, occupying all 3 podium spots with her rendition of Vola Colomba claiming the top prize. Contemporary reviews hailed Pizzi's performance as a tour de force, with the influential Corriere della Sera declaring, "Pizzi's voice soars like the dove itself, a symbol of hope and renewal for our nation's musical renaissance." The event was not without controversy, however, as a heated altercation erupted between singers Gino Latilla and Sinico Angelini, fueled by their romantic rivalry over Pizzi. Nonetheless, it was Pizzi's performance of Papaveri e Papere, a biting social commentary by Mario Panzeri, that became the festival's first international hit, covered by luminaries like Bing Crosby and Yves Montand. The third edition, again hosted by Filogamo, unveiled the double performance format, with each song interpreted by 2 different artists. While Pizzi failed to secure an unprecedented third consecutive win with Campanaro, the duo of Carla Boni and Flo Sandons claimed victory with Viale d'autunno. However, it was Latilla and Giorgio Consolini's Vecchio Scarpone that left a mark, becoming an anthem celebrated by some but criticised by others as a nostalgic ode to Italy's fascist past. The fourth edition in 1954 made history by crowning the first male winners, Gino Latilla and Giorgio Consolini, with the heartwarming Tutte le Mamme. The event was further enlivened by the antics of a mysterious protester, Serafino da Bene, the Vendicatore di Vercelli, who objected to Nilla Pizzi's exclusion in an eccentric, if ultimately harmless, manner. As the Festival di Sanremo continued to grow in popularity and cultural significance within Italy, its influence began to spread beyond the country's borders. The success of the Italian Song Contest caught the attention of other European broadcasters who saw the potential for similar events in their own countries. One such example of this influence came on March 1st, 1954, when Michael Brennan proposed the Festival of English Popular Song to the BBC. This proposal marked a significant moment in the evolution of song contests, as it represented the first attempt to adapt the Sanremo format specifically for television. At this point, Sanremo was still exclusively a radio event, making Brennan's proposal a pioneering step in the medium's transition to the small screen. Brennan's vision for the contest was ambitious and detailed. He suggested a format consisting of 3 weekly hour-long heats, each featuring 6 songs, and broadcast from different venues across the country. The grand final would then take place at London's prestigious Royal Festival Hall. Drawing inspiration from Sanremo, Brennan proposed that each song be performed twice, once with a full orchestra and once in a quieter arrangement. This dual performance approach would become a hallmark of many future song contests. Importantly, Brennan's proposal also introduced several innovative elements that would later become staples of televised song contests. He suggested the use of regional juries and, crucially, a scoreboard to visually track the voting progress during the show. These ideas would prove instrumental in shaping the dramatic tension and audience engagement that characterise modern song contests. On March 18, 1954, Brennan met with the BBC's head of light entertainment, Ronnie Waldman, and his soon-to-be successor, Eric Maschwitz, to discuss the proposal. The meeting resulted in an offer of 50 guineas for the idea, though Brennan had initially hoped for 100 guineas. Eventually, a compromise was reached at 20 guineas per show. Interestingly, the original document submitted shows that the word English was crossed out and replaced with British, changing the title to the Festival of British Popular Songs, a small but significant adjustment that reflected a more inclusive approach to the contest. The BBC showed considerable interest in the proposal, even going so far as to budget out the costs, a substantial investment that demonstrated the broadcaster's serious consideration of the idea. While Brennan's proposal didn't immediately lead to the creation of a British Song Contest, it represented a crucial step in the evolution of the format. From the multi-week structure to the dual performances and the visual scoreboard would all find their way into various national and international song contests in the years to come. A Festival di Sanremo continued to captivate Italian audiences. Its 5th edition in 1955 marked another milestone. For the first time, the contest was partially televised, joining the broadcast at 10:45 p.m. after a variety show had concluded. This move to television, albeit limited, foreshadowed the medium's growing importance in the world of song contests. Claudio Villa and Tullio Pane's haunting Buongiorno Tristezza took the top prize, with Villa memorably employing playback due to a sudden bout of laryngitis. Another landmark moment came with the appearance of singer-songwriter Odoardo Spadaro as the festival's first non-competing guest performer, reciting the lyrics of the top 3 songs. Despite controversy surrounding the selection process, the overwhelming success of the festival was cemented by the staggering sales of over 9 million records collectively. As the curtain fell on the 1955 edition, it was clear that Festival di Sanremo had firmly established itself as a cornerstone of Italy's cultural renaissance, captivating audiences nationwide and laying the groundwork for an even grander musical phenomenon to emerge very shortly. We then come to Marcel Bezençon, coming from a family with deep roots in the Suisse Romand region, the French-speaking part of Switzerland. His father, Edmond, was a professor of literature, while his mother, Marguerite, was a musician. While Bezençon studied law at the University of Geneva, obtaining his degree in 1931, his true passion lay in the arts and media. In 1933, he joined the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation SRG SSR as a radio host and producer in Geneva. He quickly made a name for himself, becoming one of the country's most popular broadcasters. This capitulated him to becoming Director General of SRG SSR in 1950. In this influential role, Bezençon championed high-quality cultural programming and helped shape the emerging television landscape in Switzerland. He emphasized Swiss identity, linguistic diversity, and European cooperation in broadcasting. Switzerland as a nation was already familiar with Festival di Sanremo, which not only achieved much success in Switzerland when SRG SSR carried the broadcast, but also many of the entries had been enormous commercial hits there too. Bezençon had seen firsthand how a simple song contest could captivate an entire nation. However, Bezençon envisioned a grander stage. He had always been a believer in a united Europe and was close friends with Jean Monnet, who has since become known as the Father of Europe, founding the European Coal and Steel Community, the organisation that would become the European Union. In September 1953, Bezençon attended a meeting of the EBU in London, which resulted in the creation of the European television season. They were a series of live broadcasts facilitated by the Eurovision network, which offered viewers across Europe a glimpse into the rich cultures that made up the continent. The inaugural programme, aired on 6 June 1954, transported audiences to the Narcissus Festival in Montreux, France, before whisking them away on a tour of Vatican City. However, for the EBU, the crowning jewel was the live coverage of the 1954 FIFA World Cup in Switzerland, a historic first that forever intertwined football with the power of television. Although in order to secure this broadcast, the EBU found themselves having to guarantee compensation to FIFA if too many people decided to watch at home instead of attending the matches. Emboldened by the success of this inaugural season, the EBU established a programme committee to chart the course for future collaborations between broadcasters. Bezençon took the helm as the committee's inaugural president, supported by the leadership of René McCall from the BBC and Jean Darcy from French broadcaster RTF as vice presidents. During their inaugural meeting in Monte Carlo in January 1955, the committee discussed the fact that while the network was technically impressive, it was also costly and they'd had very little practical use for it. While events such as the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II and the once every 4 years FIFA World Cup had enjoyed great success on the network, they weren't exactly annual occurrences the EBU could rely on. It was with this vision in mind that Bezençon proposed the groundbreaking idea of a pan-European music competition. Drawing upon the proven formula of Festival di Sanremo. While the idea was popular within the programme committee, it took until the 19th of October 1955 before it was formally approved to go ahead. At the General Assembly of the EBU, held at Rome's Palazzo Corsini, the EBU's president, Sir Ian Jacob, who was also the Director General of the BBC, formally commissioned Bezençon's proposal for SRG SSR to host the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Prix in the spring of 1956 as a Eurovision network event. The choice of Switzerland as the inaugural host country was entirely due to that being the home broadcaster Bezençon served as Director General of, and as such it was expected by the EBU that SRG SSR produced it. It was soon decided that the contest would take place in the resort town of Lugano on the 24th of May 1956. As Lugano was located in Switzerland's Italian-speaking region, the contest would fall under the organisation of RSI, of the SRG SSR franchisee for this region of the country. This meant in turn that the contest would be produced by RSI on behalf of SRG SSR on behalf of the EBU. It's not known exactly why Lugano was chosen, but it's likely that Town's similarities to San Remo were probably not a coincidence. The chosen venue was the Teatro Cursal, which had a capacity for an audience of 700, which dwarfed the 400-seat capacity of the San Remo Casino. Although Festival di San Remo was the basis for the contest, Besançon went on to develop the format and rules of the contest with his newly appointed team for the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Prix at RSI. Most of the work at this point was enacted by Eduard Haas, who devised much of the format. Some of the rejected ideas developed at this time included having each entry performed once accompanied by an orchestra, then once more by only piano and a cash prize for the winner. However, after some time, the following was eventually agreed. Each national broadcaster should submit 2 songs to participate in the contest. They can use different performers for each of the same one. Only original, previously unreleased compositions are allowed in the contest. Only soloist performers should be permitted. No song can be longer than 3 minutes and 30 seconds in duration. Each broadcaster had the choice of using their own conductor to lead the orchestra during their entry. There should be no monetary or material prize awarded to the winner of the contest. The deadline for submitting each song entry, including an audio recording, musical score, lyrics and English-French translations if needed to RSI, is the 10th of May 1956. It is strongly recommended that countries select their entries through a national competition such as Festival di San Remo. 2 jurors from each country will rate each song on a scale of 1 to 10. The song with the highest total cumulative score from all jurors wins the Grand Prix. Following the clear establishment of what competing in the competition would entail, the EBU put out an open invitation to its 23 members to come to join them in Lugano. Of these 23, 4 broadcasters dismissed the EBU's offer, uninterested in spending the time, money and resources imposed by fielding an entry. These 4 members were Ule from Finland, Tele Monte Carlo from Monaco, Moroccan Radio and Television from Morocco, and RTP from Portugal. Meanwhile, a further 8 members weren't deemed eligible to compete, as they didn't yet operate a television service in their countries, broadcasting only on radio. The 8 countries that weren't eligible to compete were therefore Greece, Ireland, Lebanon, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, the Vatican and Spain. That left 11 broadcasters: NIR from Flanders in Belgium, INR from Wallonia in Belgium, RTF from France, ARD from Germany, RAI from Italy, CLT from Luxembourg, NTS from the Netherlands, Stats Radiophonian from Denmark, ORF from Austria, the British Broadcasting Corporation from the United Kingdom, and host broadcaster the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation from Switzerland. With 2 songs each, 11 competing broadcasters would have brought the contest to a total of what would seem to have been 22 entries. However, as one might have noticed, Belgium were represented on the list twice. Belgium was, and still is, a fairly unique country when it comes to broadcasting. Culturally and politically, the nation is split across linguistic lines between the Dutch-speaking Flanders in the north and the French-speaking Wallonia in the south. This linguistic divide had historical roots dating back centuries, but it became increasingly prominent in the 20th century, leading to tensions and demands for greater autonomy from both communities. And as a result, Belgium had developed separate institutions catering to the distinct needs and identities of the Flemish and Walloon populations. One of these was the creation of 2 separate public broadcasting organisations: National Institute for the Radio Omroep, NIR, for Dutch language broadcasting in Flanders, and Institut National de Radiodiffusion, ENR, for French language broadcasting in Wallonia. These separate broadcasters were established to ensure that each linguistic community had a dedicated channel for news, entertainment and cultural programming in their respective languages, reflecting their unique identities and interests. As the rules for the Eurovision Song Contest had established that each country should submit 2 entries, it seemed plausible that both NIR and INR would take advantage of this rule, with each broadcaster selecting and submitting an entry representing their respective region and language community. However, NIR, the Flemish broadcaster, ultimately ended up declining participation, instead wanting to focus their efforts on the Venice International Song Festival. As a result, INR, the Walloon broadcaster, ended up submitting 2 entries representing the French-speaking Wallonian region, effectively representing the entire country, at least in this instance. The removal of NIR from the list of competing broadcasters took it down to 10 and a total of 20 competing entries. However, it was soon becoming clear that the BBC and the United Kingdom were beginning to have different priorities. As we've already established, on the 19th of October 1955, Sir Ian Jacob of the BBC formally gave the go-ahead for the production of the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Prix. However, unbeknownst to Marcel Besançon and SRG SSR, Sir had also commissioned the BBC to produce a similar event entitled the Festival of British Popular Songs a week earlier on the 12th of October. It seems that the plan for this competition was for it to be a British adaptation of Festival di San Remo, showcasing the stars of the day on television to mass audiences, airing heats monthly from May until the grand final in October 1956. However, when just a week later the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Prix was commissioned, Sir Ian decided to bring the Festival of British Popular Songs forward and use it as a national competition to select the 2 entries for Lugano on behalf of the United Kingdom. It's likely that the development of the Eurovision Song Contest within the EBU and the suggestion of adapting Festival di San Remo had already reached Sir Ian Jacob's ears before October and was in itself the direct inspiration and anything but a coincidence. The BBC's ideas for the Festival of British Popular Songs were ambitious, and they wanted to ensure the use of the country's biggest stars in order to make it a success. In order to meet the EBU's 10th of May 1956 deadline, they'd have to start the festival in December 1955, which gave them less than 2 months to organise it and likely making it difficult to secure the big-name stars that they had hoped for. Ultimately, the BBC chose to continue ahead as originally planned, seeing the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Prix as a far lesser priority than their own national song contest, which of course had been commissioned first. This didn't stop the BBC from wanting to participate though, and they briefly muted the suggestion of internally selecting their entry for the contest. Some contemporary reports indicate that the BBC had in fact selected at least one of their 2 entries, with Australian singer Shirley Abaker set to perform the song Little Ship. Although Abaker did go on to compete with Little Ship at the Festival of British Popular Songs, placing second later that year, her participation in Lugano ultimately did not materialise. Neither did any participation from the BBC, with them withdrawing from the competition at some point in early 1956. Most Eurovision Song Contest historians believe that Abaker was never in contention to compete, and it was actually the fact she had won the only heat of the Festival of British Popular Songs to be broadcast prior to Lugano that this myth arose. The BBC did still broadcast the event on their television service with English commentary by Wilfred Thomas despite not competing. 2 other broadcasters that had originally wanted to participate also pulled out prior to May. They were ORF from Austria and Statsradiofonien from Denmark. The exact reasons are lost to history, however, unlike with the United Kingdom, there's no evidence they ever got as far as attempting to select entries for Lugano, so it's likely they dropped out during the earlier months of pre-production. This left us with the 7 countries in our final lineup and a total of 14 competing entries. These final 7 could be seen as a symbolic representation of Europe's aspirations. The Lugano 7 were Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and the host nation Switzerland. Apart from Switzerland, the remaining 6 countries were the 6 members of the ECSC. This organisation, established in 1951, aimed to integrate the coal and steel industries of its member states, laying the foundation for economic cooperation and ultimately political unity. The Lugano 7, however, represented more than just a gathering of nations. They embodied the very essence of Europe's rich cultural tapestry. These countries, bound by a shared history and a common vision for the future, bore a striking resemblance to the territories that once formed the Holy Roman Empire at its height in the year 800 AD. In many ways, the Lugano 7 were a modern-day embodiment of the Europe envisioned a millennium earlier. I think there's a reason why, despite many individuals perhaps being able to claim the title of creator of the Eurovision Song Contest, we ultimately have given it to Marcel Besançon. The Lugano 7 compassed much of what Besançon wanted to be achieved politically in Europe, and to bring those 7 countries together for a shared broadcaster song was another way unity could be advanced. And although the Eurovision Song Contest was primarily created as a means of demonstrating the advancement of broadcast technology, the myth of it being to unify Europe after the Second World War perhaps rang true the most in the mind's eye of Besançon, and it's that myth that we and the contest itself like to hear. If you're still with us, thank you for listening to all of that, and I hope it's something you enjoyed in this painfully long off-season. To stay up to date with all our episodes, please follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or wherever else you might get your podcasts, and that includes YouTube, where you can comment, like, and subscribe. So until the next time, thank you so very much for listening, and remember to vote for the music.
This is to music first, always.
We are unstoppable.
I hope this contest can live up to its promise and continue to stand for peace and dignity for every person in this world. Thank you, vote for the music!
This is Vote for the Music, the Eurovision podcast.